fell into this. And God has kind of showed me over, backed me up in all my years and shown me how this has been a part of my life, really since the beginning. So yeah, and then probably when I was like 12 or 13, a couple at my church adopted twins, and I just thought that was the greatest thing in the world. Like, I didn't know about adoption, but I was like, oh wait, there's kids that need homes. Okay. I'm like, that's what I'm going to do someday. Like, why do I have to have kids if there are kids that already need homes? So that was my plan. I'm going to grow up and I'm going to get married and I'm going to adopt a bunch of kids. So that hasn't happened. But I have a lot of kids that I am a voice for and that I care for, and still think it's going to happen. But yeah, and so graduated from college, ended up on staff at my church back in Michigan, and doing production stuff. And God just started stirring in my heart for not just babies and then adoption, but just orphans in general. And I didn't really know anything about orphans, so I just got online and started Googling orphans and just was bombarded with all these articles and all this information that was so overwhelming. I was reading a lot about orphans in Eastern Europe, and you would hear the stories about, kids who are chained to their beds and infants that are never held. And it was just so overwhelming. And then I read this statistic that at that time, this is probably like 2001, 2002, I read that there were 163 million orphans in the world. And I was like, oh, I can't do anything to help that situation. Like, I'm just one very ordinary, average person. That I can't do anything. So I didn't do anything for quite a while. And I, through a crazy set of circumstances, ended up moving to Utah. Like, who moves to Utah? With about 30 other people to help plant a church. That was quite the adventure. And so got out here and was on staff at our church. We launched our church and things were moving. And then this orphan thing just started to resurface. And to the point where God would just not let me go about it. Where I would like lay in bed at night thinking about these kids that I was reading stories about, asking God, begging God, like, tell me what I'm supposed to do. Like, I'm desperate to know because I can't get this off my mind and my heart. I'll go anywhere, I'll do anything, just tell me what you want me to do. And I just wasn't getting anything specific. You know how we want a roadmap when we're like, this is what you're supposed to do? Like, I was not getting that. And finally, one day, what I felt like as I was laying in my bed was God just said, I just want you to go, particularly to Russia, which with this country that God had laid on my heart, and I've been reading a lot about. I just want you to go to Russia and see for yourself these kids that you've been thinking about and dreaming about. And I was like, okay, so do I just buy a plane ticket, and hop on the plane and go to Russia? But of course, God's already working, and I had been, there used to be that Lifeway Christian bookstore in Sugar House, and I was just in there perusing. I love, love, love books, and I was in there perusing books, and I saw the spine of this book. It was called Fields of the Fatherless. I was like, that's interesting. So I picked it up, and I opened it up and started reading, and this guy is talking about God's heart for the orphan, God's heart for the fatherless, everything that I've been thinking about and dreaming about for years. And then he starts talking about Russia. And then he has this ministry in Russia, and he talks all about the ministry over there. And I'm like, well, I have to talk to this guy, and I am not shy. So I flipped to the back of the book. I'm like, okay, this guy's name's Tom Davis. He leads an organization out in Colorado Springs called Children's Hope Chest. So I just called up Children's Hope Chest and said, hey, can I talk to your executive director, Tom Davis? And so Tom gets on the phone, and we had this incredible hour-long conversation. And he was like, well, in the fall, this was in the spring, he's like, in the fall, I'm taking a trip over to Russia, and I'm taking some people over with me who just want to see the ministry. And I was like, I didn't even have to pray about it, right? Because I'd already been praying about it. And I was like, okay, this is it. Sign me up. I'm on this trip. So fall of 2005, I find myself in Russia for 2 weeks. And we just go from one orphanage to the next, to the next, to the next. And God just absolutely destroyed my heart while I was over there. I mean, it's one thing to read about orphanages, and then it's another thing when you're standing in this, old Soviet orphanage that's just as dank and dark as can be, and there's all these kids, and they don't have families. And you're just like, wait, this is 2005. Like, this still exists? Yeah, it still exists. And it was so overwhelming that I remember we did 1 week, and then I remember at the end of the first week, I was like, I don't think I can do another week of this. Like, I mean, I knew I had to. It wasn't like I was going to jump on the plane and go back home, but that was the feeling. It was like, I have to do another week of this. And one thing that God really did in my heart, every time I was at an orphanage and the kids just swarm you and they want to be held and they want to touch you. And I remember I would look at a child and I would think, why wasn't that me? Like, that could have been me. I don't know why it wasn't me, but it's not. But if it was me, how badly would I want somebody to be a voice for me? Tell people that I exist, and here's how you can help me. I think of parents, like I'm not a parent, but like if you were in a place where you could not care for your child, how desperate would you be for somebody else to come along and care for your child? I think you'd be pretty desperate. And so it was just planted in my heart that day. Proverbs 31:8 became my life verse, which says to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. I'm like, you know what? I'm not the most influential person. I'm sure there's somebody better, but I'm coming back to Utah, and I'm just going to start talking about this. And so that's what I did. So I started talking about orphans, like ad nauseum. I would corner people in the parking lot. People were like, oh, here comes Amy. So, but just talking about it, and I had just gone over there for myself personally, but my church felt like God was really doing something, and let's partner with a couple of the orphanages that I had visited while we were over there. So we started sponsoring kids that were in each of the orphanages, kind of like a Compassion International type of thing, and then we started taking teams of people over there. And I just have a few pictures. This first picture is from my first trip. And this was a little boy in the very, very last orphanage that we visited. His name was Sergey, and he was 7. And my eyes just literally locked with his. I mean, I loved all the children, but my eyes locked with his. And God was like, that's your kid. That's your kid that you're going to love. And so he became my sponsor child, and we started taking these trips over. And I think the next photo just shows some pictures from our trip over there. And then in 2009, 2010, things in Russia started getting really dicey. Orphanage adoptions shut down, and orphanages were closed to Americans to come over. And so we were prevented from coming. But I'm like, that's my boy, and I have to care for him. I'm praying for him. I have to figure out some way. So I'm like, I'm just going over to Russia. This is like 2013. So I called up my friend who was a translator over there. And she's like, you're probably not going to be able to see him, but we'll see if we can figure out. So it was like trains, planes, and automobiles. Took the flight all the way over, and then a train, and then 2 buses and a taxi to get to his orphanage. He had actually transferred orphanages, so it was a new one that I had never been to. And a lady, this beautiful lady, had arranged for him to come outside and see me. And so I think that's the next picture. On the left is me seeing him for the first time in probably 4 years. The lady in the red, I tell her she's my red angel, because she was the one who arranged it. And then they actually snuck me into the orphanage, and I got to spend about 2 hours with him. And that's Sergey today. So he's 25, and we just had a FaceTime call last week. So I'm able to stay in touch with him and love him. And so that's kind of my journey. And it's interesting, though, because my heart was just, it was just an emotional pull. And then it wasn't until after that I got back, and I really started digging into, this is our call as the church. And as I was sharing with people, one of the things that I did not plan on happening was that 3 families from my church ended up adopting 4 kids from our one orphanage, which was not part of the plan. It was really, we're going to go care for these kids that probably aren't going to get adopted. And that was a huge turning point for me because God really brought me back full circle to back where I was sitting in the computer and going, there's 163 million orphans and there's nothing that I can do about it. And yet there's 4 kids that were lingering in an orphanage with no hope for a future, simply because I said, yes, I'll go. And he's doing that. And so I was like, you know what, if he can do that, if he can use me to do that in my spare time, what could he do if I was giving all of my time to it? And that's when I started for the Orphan Network with the purpose of educating churches on our call to care, which I'm going to share in just a minute, and just what are those ways to care on the whole spectrum of bringing a kid into your home to, and everything in between, because there's so many different ways to help. But yeah, I came back and I hadn't really dug in biblically to just like, okay, this seems like a good thing to do, but this is actually a part of our call as believers. So a lot of people foster and adopt and care for orphans, right? So what makes it different as us as believers? And so I just wanted to share a little bit biblically our call to care for kids. So, all throughout Scripture, God has many, many names. I was just looking last night, different names. I mean, tons of them. He's our Savior, our Redeemer. He's our bread of life. He's the King of Kings. He's the Lamb of God. And He's our Father. And then to take it a step further, in Psalm 68, it is said that He is not just our Father, but He is a father to the fatherless. A defender of widows is God in His holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. Moving on to the New Testament, God talks about orphans 18 times in the New Testament. If God mentions something 18 times, we should probably take a listen, right? So one of those 18 verses is kind of a foundation verse for us to call our call to care for orphans, and that's James 1:27. And it says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Now, I could preach on this passage all day long. I'm not going to, lucky you, but every time I look at it, I see something new. I'm like, I never realized that. So I wanted to we'll keep that up there, and I just wanted to pull a couple words out there and talk about that. So the first one is religion. That's a word we don't really like, right? Kind of has a connotation of rules, and we're like, it's not about a religion, it's about a relationship with Jesus. We try to steer away from religion. Well, here's what religion means: an outward expression of faith. That's what religion means. So it's this demonstration of something that you know to be inwardly true, and it comes out in your actions. It's something that you live out. So there's many things that we can do to exercise our faith, right? But James, for some reason, is saying that if you want a pure form of your faith, caring for orphans and widows is where it's at. And again, if the Word of God is saying that this is what defines our religion, let's not miss this. The word pure. Why does James use this word pure? He could have said religion that is the most kind, religion that is the most loving. But he says religion that is the most pure and faultless. And the word pure in the Greek, which the New Testament was written in the Greek, is katharos. It's the word katharos, which means free from the mixture or adhesion of anything that soils, adulterates, or corrupts. It's where we get the word cathartic, right? So if we say we've had a cathartic experience, it's a good experience. It's something that has cleansed us, has made us better physically and emotionally. It's also where we get the word catheter, which I've never had the pleasure of having one, but I'm sure some of you have, and I heard they're not the most comfortable thing. But if you think about, a catheter, it's this tube that's put in you to flush out all these toxins that are inside of you and make you better and make you whole. So I think what James is saying is that caring for orphans and widows does something to the soil of our hearts. It cleanses us, it purifies us from, I think, ourselves, right? Our selfishness, our self-centeredness, when we're emptied out and caring for somebody who can do nothing for us, nothing in return. That is what God is saying is the best thing for our hearts and our souls. Moving on to the word to look after. Some translations say to visit. So to look after, if you're looking after something, if you're looking after someone's child or someone's dog, you're paying pretty good attention to it, right? It's not just like this, I'm going to glance over, a couple times a day or whatever. You are intently caring for them. To visit, that word visit, in some translations, it's not just this, we think of visit, I'm going to come over, have a cup of coffee, hang out, leave 20 minutes later. No, the word visit, when it's used, is the same way it's used when Luke says in Luke 1:68, I don't have this verse up there, so don't be like looking for it, but Luke 1:68, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come to his people and redeemed them. So that come to is the same as visit. So it's this God came near visit, right? It's a I'm going to come and be a part of your life. I'm going to come and serve you, not at an arm's length, but at the most intimate length possible. So it's personal, it's literal, it's I'm coming for you, it's action. And then lastly, orphans and widows. Why orphans and widows? So back in Jesus' time, if you were an orphan and you were a widow, you had literally nothing to contribute to society. If you were a widow, if your husband died, you didn't own land, you didn't have a job, you were literally nothing. You were the most vulnerable of society. And of course, kids, obviously kids. Kids are the most vulnerable. They don't have a voice. Well, they do have a voice, but it's often not heard. They don't have a way to advocate for themselves. So of course, orphans and widows are going to be our most vulnerable and the ones that we need to look after. I love this verse, and then I read this great quote just this past week, and I'm like, oh, this really encapsulates this verse. It's from Martin Luther. It says, the world does not need a definition of religion as much as it needs a demonstration. I think that stands on its own. So the early church knew this, right? The early church knew this call to care for kids. In ancient Rome, when babies were born and they were not wanted because they were often maybe the wrong gender or they had a disability, people would take them outside of the city gates, the city walls, and leave them outside. It was an act called exposing. So they were exposing this child to the elements to basically die. So they would die from the weather, an animal, or whatever. And it was the Christians during that time who were usually the persecuted minority who would come outside the city gates and gather those kids and bring them into home and to care for them. I read in another a book that I have that candidates for leadership in the early church was that you were to be a lover of orphans. It was that important. So clearly, this is a part of who we are. It's a part of our identity, both as individuals who follow Jesus and collectively as a church. And yet, somewhere along the way, in every country, including the United States, we have relinquished that responsibility to the government. We look at the orphanage system in other countries. We wonder why it's not working, that when kids leave, the statistics, the kids in Russia, they're kicked out at 16. And this is what they have to look forward to when they age out: homelessness, suicide, drugs, alcohol, prostitution, and prison. People ask, do we have orphanage in the United States? And we have what's called the foster care system, which I'm going to share a little bit about. And usually when you hear the word foster care system, you just think negative, right? And it gets a bad rap, and people complain about it all the time, how terrible it is, how terrible the job the government is. And I'm like, you know what? It wasn't the government's job in the first place to care for kids. It was our job, and we relinquished that to them, and they're doing the best that we can. We have outsourced our job to the government. We do need the government, right? We need healthy systems of justice. But the government cannot love. And as a friend of mine says, the government makes a terrible parent, right? So you guys, how do we step back into this calling as God's people, as the church? How do we care for kids? And I could talk forever about overseas stuff. God has really focused my heart during this season on locally on our kids. And so everything I'm going to kind of go forward sharing with you is local. So what do we do? And here it's plain and simple. We need to show up. On my journey in advocacy, and especially when I was first learning about foster care, I was at a conference and I heard a pastor speak. He was from Colorado, and he didn't know anything about the foster care system. And he found out that there were 800 kids in the state of Colorado that were legally available for adoption. And he's like, wait, what? There's 800 kids? Oh my gosh, we have to do something, like this urgency. But he's like, I don't know anything about the system. I don't know what to do. So he's like, okay, I'll make an appointment with somebody at the state, the Department of Child and Family Services, which is in every state of the U.S. And so he makes this appointment with this guy, and he goes in and he says, I'm, Pastor so-and-so from this church. I just learned about this crisis that we have, and we want to do something to help. And the guy kind of had this glazed over, deer in the headlights look. And after a couple of seconds of it, the guy looked at him. He's like, that's awesome. He goes, I didn't know that the church even cared. And I remember hearing that, and like you, my heart sunk. And I thought, that's not just an isolated place. That's not just Colorado. That is the view of the church, I think, in every state. I had a little bit of a similar experience when I started for the Orphan Network in 2013. I made an appointment with Utah Foster Care, and they're the ones who recruit families and train families. And I was telling them what I was doing, and specifically that I was focusing on churches, like getting the church to be involved. And he's like, that's amazing. He goes, families of faith, which I'm sure he's including, different faiths, but he goes, families of faith are always our best families. We just don't know how to find you. And I was like, wait, you don't know? We should be knocking on your door, right? Saying, we've come for these kids that we are called to care for. You can't find us? There's something wrong. There's something wrong with that. And so the dream is this. I'm going to share this quote. I love quotes. From Dr. Russell Moore. What if our foster care system in every one of our communities knew that churches were the first place willing to help families and children in crisis? What if? And here's the thing, you guys, is that it's not that we don't have enough people. We have enough, and in fact, we have more than enough people to care for children, to adopt, to foster, to support, to mentor. We have so many we have so many people in this network, global network that we call the church. I want to throw up, I don't like statistics because they're paralyzing, as I told you, but I think it's also important just to know. So I want to just throw up this slide in the U.S. So this is all of U.S. In any one time, there's 400,000 kids in the foster care system. And I'm going to share how those kids end up in the system. But that just gives you an idea of how many. So there are 120,000, actually I think it's now more, somewhere between 100 and 120,000 kids that are legally available for adoption, where they've had parental rights terminated, and they're waiting for to be adopted. And every year, 20,000 of those kids will age out without ever having received a home or been adopted. I think, how wouldn't it be amazing if instead of a list of 120,000 kids that need homes, what if we had a list of families that were waiting? What if we flip that list? No waiting kids, only waiting families. Um, I want to share a little bit just about, because I don't want to presume that people know about the foster care system, but I just want to share a little bit of how it kind of works. I think a big misconception is that kids come into care because of something that they've done, which is absolutely not true. Kids come into foster care because they are in a home environment where there is abuse or neglect. Anytime somebody is worried about a child, it could be a neighbor. Teachers are actually the largest reporters of suspected child abuse or neglect. So anytime a call is made into that Department of Child and Family Services, they have a certain amount of time where they have to go out and do an investigation. And a lot of times they get there and there's no intentional abuse or neglect, but it's what I would call neglect out of poverty. They don't have food. The kids are sleeping on the floor. They're riding in their cars without car seats. And so then the caseworker's job is to kind of help that family help themselves with resources that are available out into the community. But sometimes there is abuse and neglect, and it's decided that those kids need to be removed from their homes. And they always look for a family member who might be able to take the child. That's called a kinship placement, or even a best friend, of the family. They would call that a fictive kin placement. And if there's nobody kind of in those categories that can take the child, then they are placed in a home where people have become licensed to become foster parents. And then the goal is always reunification, right? The parents have about a year to be involved in the services that a judge kind of says, these are the things that we need you to do to get your children back. Could be drug and alcohol rehab. It could be parenting classes, finding secure housing and a job and things like that. And there's, monthly check-ins to see how the family's doing, and the kids get to visit their families. And then at some point, the judge decides if the child can go back to their home. And that happens at about 65% of the time that a kiddo can go back home. But if they can't, then that's when parental rights are terminated, and that kid is legally available for their award of the state, but then they legally become available for adoption. And the hope is that whatever foster home they're in, that home will usually adopt them. But it doesn't always happen for various reasons. And that's where we get our 120,000 kids that are in that position right now, that are legally available for adoption and don't have an adoptive family. I want to kind of take it more local to Utah, and just share. It's funny, you can't see the map. You see Utah. There we are, hanging out, all orange in the U.S. But so we have, at any one time, we have about 2,500 kids who are in foster care. We have about 250 kids that are legally free for adoption. And about 120 of those kids, again, will age out every year without ever having gotten a family. So that's kind of what the landscape looks like in our backyard. Just as I shared, the statistics for kids, who are aging out of orphanages overseas are terrible. They're a little better, but they're not much better here. And so again, I don't like stats, but here we go with some stats. So these are kids who will age out without receiving a home. 70% of women will become pregnant before 21. 60% end up being trafficked. 20% become instantly homeless. Less than 3% will earn a college degree. 25% are dealing with PTSD. And 25% will be incarcerated within 2 years of aging out. And then just a couple more statistics that aren't up there. Half of all the homeless population in the U.S. spent some time in foster care. 80% of inmates on death row were in foster care. And children in foster care, going back to the PTSD, children in foster care experience PTSD at twice the rate of combat veterans. And so, we talk about, is the church wanting to be involved in homeless ministry and trafficking and prison ministry. And guess what? Foster care is ground zero for all of that stuff. When you're involved in this, you're involved in preventing all those other things from happening. I just wanted to share a story really quick about a girl that I ran across her story who aged out, and to just kind of give you some perspective of what it's like to be a kiddo that ages out. We have a picture of her. Her name's Natalie, and this is, you can't read it. I'm going to read it for you, but this is an ad that she placed in Craigslist. And the ad is titled, "Young Female College Student Looking to Rent a Family for Birthday." She says, "Hi, I'm currently a young female college student looking to rent a family that I can spend time with on my birthday in a few weeks. I aged out of foster care, and since I was never adopted, I don't have a family to spend holidays or my birthday with. I was placed in foster care after being severely beaten by my parents, so spending time with my biological family is not an option. I'm not weird or anything. I was just inspired by another girl that rented a family from Craigslist in California for the holidays. I just want one day that I can feel important and special and like I matter, even if I really don't. I've never had a good birthday, so I figured why not this birthday? I'm not looking for any monetary support as I work. I can pay you $8 an hour. Thanks in advance." There are 20,000 Natalies every year that are in a spot like that. In Utah, we have whatever, 120, 150 Natalies that age out every year. And where are we as the church for kids like Natalie that feel like they have nothing, nobody, and they have to place an ad and pay somebody $8 an hour to be their family? It should be our joy and our honor and our privilege to be Natalie's family, right? So some pretty heavy stuff, but there is so much hope. And I've been a part of seeing so much hope in being involved in children's and families' lives in crisis that I can't help but want to invite other people into it, right? You know, we can look at James 1:27 and view it as like a command that you have to care for orphans. And, you know, if we feel like a command or a mandate, it's like something I have to do. And what I've come to realize is like it's the ultimate privilege that we get to do this. Like that's my tagline is is like we get to do this. We get to do this. We get to be a part of this. And so the bridge, I'm so excited, is going to be jumping in and being a part of a collective community of churches that are already involved in the Valley. And we are focused on these kiddos. And there's so many ways to be involved. This is something where everybody can do something. I don't care if you're a kid or a senior citizen, you're married, you're not, you're a college student, anybody can be involved in this. I think we often think, if I can't adopt a child and bring a child into my home, then there's nothing that I can do. And again, there's so many more things we can do. And so I'm just going to share about a couple of those things that I'm going to help you guys with launching here. The first thing is called Care Portal. And Care Portal is a national program. It's being used in about 30 different states, and my organization has implemented it. And it's an online platform. They go into a city, and an organization launches it, so we've launched it, and then we partner with child welfare, so Department of Child and Family Services, really any organizations that's serving families and vulnerable kids. So we're looking for some more partnerships. We're hoping the Crisis Pregnancy Center is going to be a partner of ours, Utah Foster Care. So it's really any organizations that's working with children and families in crisis, and their caseworkers, when they go on those visits, they get that call, and they have to investigate what's going on with the family and then help them with resources. That's up to the caseworker. You guys, these caseworkers are so overworked and underpaid. It's ridiculous. I think the average lifespan of a caseworker is 18 months because they're paid nothing. They have 35 families on their caseload. We talk about kids slipping through the cracks. Well, of course they are. One person can't manage 35 families. So the care portal is something that they can go in and they can request an item for this family that they're serving. So again, it might not be this kid needs to be removed, but they are sleeping on the floor. That's the number one thing that they find is kids don't have a bed and they're sleeping on the floor. They're riding in the car without car seats. So they can enter in for those families. They can also enter in to serve families that are adopting and are fostering. Sometimes somebody gets a call for a foster child like that. And it might be out of the age range that they were expecting and they don't have something. And so that can go into the portal, and right away those needs go out to any church that is signed up to be a part of it. And you guys, just all you have to say is, I'm willing to receive an email whenever those needs come out to help meet those needs. All the items can be used as long as they're in really good condition, except for car seats. The state requires that car seats are brand new. But you guys, we all have stuff sitting around, right, in garages. We all have friends that have things sitting around. We have enough to care for people, right? And so that goes out, and then the great thing is, if you want to, you get to make that delivery to the family. You don't give it to the caseworker. You get to take it directly to the family. And what that does is and many times it can start a relationship. So many of these families are isolated. They feel that everyone is against them. They've had their kids taken away, or the prospect of their kids taken away. And you get to be somebody who's going to show up on their doorstep without judgment of what their story is or how they've gotten to there, and just say, I'm here to help, and we've brought this here. And sometimes it's just a one-time thing, and then other times we've just had some great mentoring relationships that have happened, and then continuing ongoing relationships, and families that start coming to the churches that brought them items. There's never this obligation of, like, now you have to come to our church. We never want to feel like that. But if they do, they know they have a place, and they have a positive connection in the community. So this is actually pictures of a family that my church helped. We got a request for a dad who was reuniting with his daughter. So the child went into foster care, and dad did all of the hard work to get the kiddo back, and they had just secured their apartment. He had scraped together enough money just to, get that apartment, reserved and everything, but had no money for furniture. And so it went out that this family needed stuff. And people just started, saying, I have this and I have that. And then it was so great because a family in our church was like, we have everything. We're moving, we're downsizing, you can have everything. And so this is a men's small group at my church. And so they just said, this Saturday, we're going to go, and a guy worked for FedEx. So he's like, I'm going to bring my FedEx truck, right? No matter what you do for a job, who you are, you have something to give, right? This guy's like, I work for a FedEx, and I've got a truck. So he brings his truck. They loaded up all this furniture. And then we went over. I met them over there, and we met over to this house, and that's Mario. He's sitting on the bed. And we started bringing stuff in, and the little girl, Zoe, came out, and she's like, is that for us? And then she saw this bed that we were bringing in. Is that going to go in my room? She's like, yeah. And she's like, I'm going to show you my room. She runs up, and so they start setting up the bed. And it was just this most amazing, fabulous thing to be a part of this guy's story. And I look at that, and I'm like, why would you not want to be a part of that? Like, why would you not want to experience something that amazing? And a couple of the guys in the group have stayed in touch with Mario. A couple of the guys have daughters his age, and they've taken daughters over to play with him. And Mario just feels so, he was just overwhelmed with thankfulness. And we were overwhelmed with just, that we get to be a part of the story. So that's Care Portal. All it is, again, is an ask that you would, receive an email. And we're going to do a short training after the service today. If you are somebody who not just wants to receive that email and to provide an item, but would like to help make those deliveries too. We'll just do a short little training to equip you on that. The second thing that I help churches do is form care communities. And for foster families. So fostering is very tough. Very difficult job. The statistic is that half of all foster parents quit after 1 year. They didn't realize how difficult it was going to be. and then they didn't have support. And so we in the church want to say anytime somebody in our body is going to step up and actually say, we're going to bring a kid into your home, then all of us who are not, we're going to help, right? We're going to help with tangible items, that they need, but then also just ongoing support. And we have a slide that kind of shows a care community. Care community is a group of about 6 to 8 people who commit to coming around a family that's fostering or caring to serve them in specific ways. And you'll have specific roles that you can help. You could help with meals. We make sure that the family gets a hot meal every week. And then, every family needs something different. It could be going grocery shopping for the family, lawn care, car maintenance. Just, again, everyone has something to give, right? These families, again, they have so many. When you're a foster parent, it's not just like adding one kid to your group you already have. These kids have tons of appointments that they have to go to. And you don't have a say at what time they are, where they're at. So they might need childcare, too, for you to be able to go pick up a kiddo or maybe pick up one of their bio kids from soccer practice so mom can take foster kiddo to therapy or a family visit or things like that. And so we need people who are specifically like, I want to help with childcare also. Just making sure that they get a date night, too. And so this is a way that we can come around and love on families that are fostering or adopting. And the organization that I trained with to launch these, they've been doing them for about 10 years. And so they did a study, and they found that if a family has a care community, there's a 90% retention rate of families. So it's not that half, quitting after 1 year. So that's another way. If you want to be involved in a care community, I think at some point we'll do a separate training for that. But if that's something that interests you, out on the table, out back, there is a sign up, and you can put your name down. And you're not committing to it. You're just like, hey, I want to get more information on this. Come to a more in-depth informational meeting. And then we can, for those of you who want to do that, we can equip you and train you and if there's a family here that's fostering or adopting, we want to put them around, people in your body. But then if there isn't, we can go to Utah Foster Care and say, do you have a family that's really struggling? And we want to put a group of people around him. There's a lot of single people that foster. I'm like, every single person should have a care community, right, around them. And so we can, if you don't have somebody here, we can find you a family to love and serve. And then, of course, there are those of you who God is going to call to foster or adopt. Again, the goal of foster care is reunification for the family. And so we just need families, like good families who are like, we want to be a loving, good, safe place for a child in hopes that they're going to get to go back home to their family. This is going to be our ministry. And then again, sometimes those kids become available for adoption. And then there are the kids who are already available for adoption. It's obviously not, it's easy to see something like this and just like rush out, like, okay, I'm going to adopt a bunch of kids. But it's something where you really need to count the cost. And I'm not talking financial cost, which incidentally, people don't know this, but the kids who are available for adoption are free. Like it's you don't pay anything. The government actually pays you. They pay expenses, and then you actually may continue to get a subsidy depending on the child's needs. But you count the cost because these children are incredible, wonderful children who have done nothing to be where they're at, but because of where they've been at, they bring trauma with them, and their trauma becomes your trauma. It comes into your home. So it's something you really want to count the cost and think about and become trauma informed. How do you parent a child from a difficult background? It's a very different way and style than just how you would parent your biological kids. So if that is on your heart, I would love to talk with you more about how I can connect you. Utah Foster Care just has great informational sessions. Just come and hear. They'll do a panel of foster parents who will share their story, and you just get to listen. And so that is kind of the ultimate way to be involved. But again, there's a place for everybody in caring for kids. I'm going to end, and I just want to share with you guys, again, like, this is such a privilege to get to be a part of. And, you mentioned it, somebody mentioned it, like, we need to get outside our walls, right? And be the church. I was talking to a friend of mine, and I'm like, I don't know that I've ever seen the church and Christianity and Christians in a more negative view than right now. The things you read, stories you hear, people who are leaving the church who are so hurt, and just so many things. And I think that within church history, there's a lot of defining moments, right? All the way back to the Reformation with Martin Luther, to the Jesus movement, in the 70s. I think that this is a really poignant time for us. I think it started happening before COVID, but I think COVID just really kind of lit it up, of going, okay, church, what are you about? Are you just about meeting for that 1 hour on Sunday? Or are you about being outside of the walls and caring? And I remember, again, I love quotes. So a great guy named Simon Sinek said, people don't care about what you do, they care about why you do it. And so we have a chance to care for kids, which is our calling, and it's God's heart, and it becomes our heart. But then it is also a testament to a watching world. Again, lots of people do this, care for kids who aren't believers. Why do we do it? Why do we do it? Because it's the heart of Jesus. I'm going to pray for you guys, and then I think someone's going to come back up. So, Jesus, thank you so much for every person that's sitting in this room, that they were your design, that you placed them here in this time of history, at this church, in this community, God, and you have something for them. You want to love them in a way that's so deep. And one of the best ways of doing that is asking your people to care for children. It's the best thing for us, that it cleanses our souls. It takes us out of ourselves, and it puts us out into the world with people who are lost and broken and need good news, Jesus. And so I pray for every person in this world. Every person in this room. I pray that you would spark their heart of what it is that they could do to be involved, God. Maybe bring to mind things that they never thought about. Maybe there are people who are sitting in here who never thought about possibly bringing a child into their home. And though it's a great responsibility, it's so needed. And so, God, I just pray that you would continue to impress on their heart what it is that you have for them. And maybe it's not that roadmap of exactly, here's what you're supposed to do, but it's just a next step. I thought, okay, I'm just supposed to go to Russia. And this is like, okay, I'm just supposed to sign up to do Care Portal. I don't know what this means, but I'm going to sign up to do it. I don't know if I'm supposed to foster, but I'm going to help a family that is. And this is my next step. God, would you show each of us what our next step is? And God, would you be glorified in this valley? And so that when people start looking and going, who are all these people that are caring for kids? We don't say it's the Bridge Church, or it's K2 the church, or it's Calvary Chapel. We're like, it's the body of Jesus in the Salt Lake Valley in the state of Utah who are coming in and loving. Jesus, thank you for the privilege. Thank you for adopting us, for letting us call you Father. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thanks, Amy. That's it. It's the heart. We know that it's the heart of God.